Hello, my name is Orion Wells. What I'm about to tell you may seem unbelievable to many, but I can assure you that it is an experience that changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. In the 1980s, I was a young journalist in New York, living a life full of challenges and uncertainty. It was a turbulent time, especially for someone like me who was facing a battle with AIDS. At that time, the fear of AIDS was palpable, the social stigma was overwhelming, and many of us lived with a constant feeling of anxiety and isolation. I was at the height of my career as a journalist, covering important stories and making a name for myself in the competitive world of New York news. But at the same time, I was fighting an invisible enemy that was slowly consuming my body and spirit. The symptoms started subtly at first: fatigue, night sweats, small infections that seemed to last longer than usual. But over time, they became impossible to ignore. I lost weight drastically, developed brown lesions on my face that I couldn't hide, and a persistent cough that left me breathless after the slightest exertion. Despite all this, I refused to give up. I continued working, writing stories and investigating injustices. But each day became a bigger struggle than the last. I could feel the looks of pity and fear from my colleagues. I could hear the whispers as I passed through the newsroom hallways. Still, I clung to my identity as a journalist, as if it was the only thing keeping me grounded in reality. It was in this context that I experienced something that challenged everything I believed about life and death. An experience that made me question the very nature of reality and completely redefined my purpose in life. This is the story of my near-death experience, a journey that took me beyond the limits of what I thought was possible and brought me back with a new perspective on what it means to truly live. It was a night like any other in New York. The streets were busy, taxis were honking incessantly, and I was in my small apartment, fighting an abdominal pain that seemed to get worse by the minute. I hadn't felt well for weeks, but that night, the pain became unbearable. I remember falling to my knees on the bathroom floor, in a cold sweat and shaking. With shaking hands, I managed to reach the phone and call my friend and fellow journalist, David Carter. His voice on the other end was like a beacon in the darkness. "Hang in there, Orion. I'm calling an ambulance." The next few minutes passed in a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and urgent voices. When the ambulance arrived, I could barely stay conscious. The paramedics looked at me with a mixture of compassion and apprehension. I knew my appearance, marked by AIDS, scared them. The trip to the hospital was torture. Each bump of the ambulance sent waves of pain through my body. I could hear the paramedics discussing my case in hushed tones, mentioning medical terms that I didn't fully understand. But that sounded ominous. When we arrived at the hospital, I was greeted with hesitation. I could see the fear in the employees' eyes as they watched me be taken out of the ambulance. There was a moment of palpable tension as the doctors on duty debated whether to admit me or not. The fear of contagion was real, and I could feel the weight of the stigma crushing me even more than the physical pain. It was at that moment that David arrived, like a knight in shining armor. He insisted that they treat me, citing our connections in the news industry and threatening to expose discrimination if they refused to help me. Reluctantly, I was admitted. The next few hours were a whirlwind of exams, tubes being inserted, and doctors looking at medical records with grave expressions. The pain continued to increase, and I could feel my consciousness wavering. At some point, I heard someone mention the need for emergency surgery. As I was prepped for the operation, I felt a deep, paralyzing fear. It wasn't just the fear of the surgery itself, but the fear that this could be the end of my journey. I wasn't ready to leave. There were so many stories I still wanted to tell, so many injustices I still wanted to expose. As the anesthesia began to take effect, my thoughts turned to my life, my career, the people I loved. And it was then, on the threshold between consciousness and unconsciousness, that my journey truly began. The moment I crossed the threshold between this world and the next is etched in my memory with surprising clarity. While I was on the operating table, feeling the anesthesia taking over my body, something extraordinary happened. Suddenly, the pain that had tormented me for so long just disappeared. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. In its place, I felt an indescribable lightness, as if my entire being were floating. I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I had, and found myself looking down. There I was, lying on the operating table, pale and still, surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses working frantically. It was a surreal scene, as if I were watching a film about my own life. I tried to get their attention, to say that I was fine, that the pain was gone, but no one seemed to hear or see me. It was at that moment that I realized I was no longer in my physical body. Before I could fully process what was happening, I felt a gentle but insistent force pulling me away from the operating room. There was no fear, just intense curiosity and a feeling that something important was about to happen. I found myself being drawn into what I can only describe as a tunnel. It wasn't dark or scary like you might imagine. In fact, it was the opposite. The tunnel glowed with a soft, welcoming light, pulsing with colors I had never seen before. It was as if each tone contained within it every other possible tone. As I progressed through the tunnel, I realized that it was not a simple corridor, but a vortex in constant motion. The walls, if I can call them that, seemed to be made of pure energy, forming intricate patterns that resembled an infinite target. Movement through this vortex was smooth and effortless. There was no sensation of speed, although I had the impression that I was traveling at incredible speed. Time, as we know it, seemed to not exist in this place. As I went further, I started to hear sounds. They were not sounds like those we know on Earth, but rather a cosmic symphony of indescribable beauty. It was as if every particle in the universe was singing in perfect harmony. And then, in the middle of this surreal journey, I saw something that made my heart, or whatever my being was at that moment, skip. Familiar faces began to appear. My grandparents, Huron, who had passed away years before, were there, smiling at me with a love that transcended anything I had ever experienced. Next to them, I saw a man I recognized from family photos, my uncle, whom I never had the chance to meet in life. They didn't speak, at least not with words. Instead, I felt their messages of love and welcome resonating through my being. It was as if we were communicating on a level much deeper than language. As I continued my journey through the tunnel, guided by these loving presences, I felt I was about to discover something truly extraordinary. As I progressed through the tunnel, guided by the familiar faces of my loved ones, a subtle change began to occur. The target-shaped vortex that surrounded me began to transform, revealing something that defied all of my previous understanding of the universe. Before my eyes, if I can call the perception I had at that moment that, sequences of numbers began to appear. These were not ordinary numbers. They were complex mathematical codes that floated around me as if they were an integral part of the very fabric of reality. The numbers 222, 333, 444, 999, and many others manifested themselves in ways that transcended simple visualization. They were, at the same time, vibrant colors and harmonious sounds. Each numerical sequence seemed to contain within it an entire universe of meanings and connections. It was as if I was witnessing the fundamental language of the cosmos, the source code of reality. Each number, each sequence, pulsed with its own energy, transmitting information at a level that went far beyond intellectual understanding. As I observed these codes, something extraordinary began to happen. It was as if my consciousness was expanding exponentially. I began to understand things I had never been able to understand before. It was as if I was receiving a massive download of knowledge and wisdom. Complex concepts that had always eluded me in my earthly life suddenly became crystal clear. The history of humanity, the mysteries of the universe, the fundamental laws of physics, it all unfolded before me in an infinite tapestry of understanding. I realized that these numerical codes were not just abstract symbols, but representations of deep patterns that permeate all existence. The number 222, for example, seemed to represent balance and harmony. 333 vibrated with an energy of growth and expansion. The 444 conveyed a sense of stability and foundation, and 9999 pulsed with the energy of completion and transformation. But it wasn't just the individual numbers that carried meaning, and as I absorbed this knowledge, I felt my consciousness expanding to encompass not just my own life, but the entire history of humanity and beyond. I understood that the universe is not a chaotic and random place, but an incredibly complex and interconnected system, governed by laws and patterns that go far beyond our everyday understanding. In that moment, I felt connected to everything that has ever existed and everything that will ever exist. It was an overwhelming sense of unity and purpose that defied description in human terms. And as I floated in this sea of cosmic knowledge, I realized that this journey was far from over. There was more, much more, to be revealed. While I was still absorbing the vastness of knowledge I had received through the number codes, the scenery around me began to change again. The vortex of light and numbers gradually dissipated, and I found myself in a completely different environment. Before me, majestic and imposing, stood a tree like none I had ever seen before. Its roots seemed to extend to infinity, delving into the depths of existence itself. The trunk was robust and ancient, with a bark that seemed to contain the history of the entire universe. The branches stretched out in all directions, reaching dimensions my mind could barely comprehend. Instinctively, I knew I was standing before the legendary tree of life. It was not just a tree in the common sense of the word, but a living representation of all existence, of all possibilities, of all lives that have ever been lived and will yet be lived. I felt drawn to her, as if a gentle force was guiding me. As I got closer, I realized that each leaf on the tree was, in fact, a window into a life, not just mine, but that of countless beings across time and space. It was then that something extraordinary happened. I sat under the branches of the tree of life, and suddenly I began to relive every moment of my own existence. It was like I was watching a movie of my life, but not as a mere spectator. I was there, reliving every moment, every decision, every interaction. I saw my birth, my first steps, my school years. I relived my first loves, my disappointments, my triumphs. I saw the moment when I decided to become a journalist, driven by the desire to seek the truth and make a difference in the world. But it wasn't just the big moments that stood out. Every small act of kindness, every kind word, every gesture of compassion shone with a special light. At the same time, I saw times when I was selfish, times when I hurt others, times when I let fear stop me from taking action. The most surprising thing was that there was no judgment in this review. There was no condemnation for mistakes, nor excessive praise for successes. It was simply a clear and compassionate observation of every moment of my life. As the review progressed, I began to see how every action, every decision, no matter how small, had consequences that extended far beyond what I could have imagined. I saw how a simple act of kindness could set off a chain reaction of positive events. I also saw how harsh words or selfish actions could cause waves of pain that spread far beyond the initial moment. I realized, with a clarity I never had before, the interconnectedness of all things. Each life was linked to countless others. Each action affected the whole in ways I had never considered. As this life review drew to a close, culminating in my final moments on the operating table, I felt a deep sense of understanding and acceptance. I understood that every moment of my life, every joy and every pain, every triumph and every mistake, had been an essential part of my journey. And as I absorbed these profound lessons beneath the branches of the tree of life, I felt I was about to receive an even more important message, an understanding that would forever change my perception of existence. As the last scenes of my earthly life faded, I felt a change in the atmosphere around me. The tree of life began to emit a soft glow. The first and most profound revelation was that of the fundamental unity of all things. I realized that the universe is not a collection of separate objects, but an interconnected and interdependent whole. Every atom, every living being, every planet and star, Everything was part of a cosmic web of existence. This understanding went beyond the intellectual. I could feel this unity in every fiber of my being. The second revelation was about the cyclical nature of life and existence. I understood that there is really no death in the sense of an absolute end, but rather a continuous transformation. The lives we live are like waves in the ocean of consciousness. They arise, have their unique existence, and then return to the whole, only to resurface in new forms. Another crucial revelation was about the purpose of life. I understood that there is no single predetermined purpose, but that each being creates its own meaning through its choices and actions. The universe is an infinite field of possibilities, and each life is an opportunity to explore, learn, and grow. I was also introduced to a deeper understanding of time. In the cosmic perspective, past, present, and future exist simultaneously. Each moment contains within itself all moments. This revelation made me understand the importance of living fully in the present, as each moment is eternal in its own way. One of the most impactful revelations was about the nature of love. I realized that love is not just a human emotion, but a fundamental force in the universe. It is love, in its broadest and deepest sense, that unites all things, that drives evolution and growth. I also understood the role of free will and personal responsibility. Every being has the power to make choices, and these choices shape not only our own reality, but affect the whole. With this power comes the responsibility to act with awareness and compassion. I received visions of the future, not as a fixed destination, but as possibilities based on humanity's collective choices. I saw the dangers of greed and destruction, but also the potential for healing and positive transformation. The last and perhaps most profound revelation was about the nature of consciousness. I understood that consciousness is not a product of the brain, but the fundamental essence of reality. Everything in the universe, in a way, is conscious and interconnected. These revelations did not come as abstract information, but as lived experiences. Each realization was accompanied by a feeling of expansion, as if my consciousness was merging with the very fabric of the universe. As I absorbed these cosmic truths, I felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. I understood that no matter what happened next, I was part of something much bigger and more wonderful than I could have ever imagined. While I was still immersed in these cosmic revelations, I felt a subtle shift. It was as if a gentle breeze was calling me back. At first, I resisted. How could I leave this state of understanding and unity to return to the limited world I knew? But then, a voice, not an audible voice, but a deep understanding, made me understand that my journey was not yet complete. There was a purpose for my return, lessons to share, a life to be lived with a new perspective. The return process was as intense as the outward journey. I felt myself being pulled back through the layers of existence. The cosmic revelations, the tree of life, the tunnel of light, everything passed through me in a whirlwind of sensations and memories. And then, suddenly, the pain came back. It was like being struck by lightning. My body, which had been forgotten during my spiritual journey, was now screaming in agony. Every nerve felt like it was on fire, every cell protesting the return to physical reality. I opened my eyes and found myself back in the intensive care unit. The constant beeping of the machines, the aseptic smell of the hospital, the muffled voices of the doctors and nurses. It all felt surreal and strange after the expansiveness of my experience. I tried to speak, to tell someone what had happened, but I found I couldn't. A tube in my throat prevented me from forming words. My limbs felt heavy and did not respond to my commands. Little by little, I became aware of the severity of my physical condition. Apparently, I had been in a coma for 3 weeks. My body, already weakened by AIDS, had fought hard to survive. Doctors later told me that there were times when they thought I wouldn't survive. The days that followed were a constant struggle. Physically, I was at my limit. Pain was a constant companion, and every small movement was a challenge. Mentally, I oscillated between the clarity of the revelations I had received and the confusion of the hospital reality. Isolation was perhaps the most difficult aspect. Due to my condition, visits were extremely limited. The few who could see me, mostly doctors and nurses, were covered from head to toe in protective gear. It was difficult not to feel like an outcast, an untouchable being. But in the midst of this physical and emotional challenge, something inside me had fundamentally changed. The understanding of the unity of all things, the knowledge of love as a universal force, these truths have stayed with me, giving me strength when everything else seemed bleak. Slowly, very slowly, I started to improve. Every little bit of progress, breathing unassisted, sitting up in bed, taking a few tentative steps was a victory, and with each step toward recovery, I felt a sense of purpose growing within me. I knew I had returned for a reason, and I was determined to find out what it was. As my physical strength returned, I faced a new challenge. How do I share my experience with a world that might not be ready to hear it? How could I translate the cosmic truths I had experienced into a language that others could understand? This question would stay with me in the days, weeks, and months that followed, shaping the course of my life in ways I never could have predicted. My physical recovery was slow and challenging, but the inner transformation I experienced was rapid and profound. When I was finally released from the hospital, I was a completely different person than the one I had walked in on weeks before. Returning to the normal world after my near-death experience was, in many ways, more difficult than the experience itself. The colors seemed more vibrant, the sounds more intense. Every human interaction carried a weight and meaning that I had never realized before. It was as if I was seeing the world through a new pair of eyes, understanding it with a new set of senses. My first instinct was to return to journalism. After all, this had been my passion, my way of seeking the truth and making a difference in the world. But I soon realized that my old career could no longer contain everything I needed to express. The stories I wanted to tell were different now. They weren't about politics or corporate scandals, but about the interconnectedness of all things, about the power of love and compassion, about the fundamental truths I had experienced during my journey. I started exploring new ways to share my experience. I wrote a book about my near-death experience, giving talks in small groups initially, then at larger conferences. To my surprise, I discovered that there were many people eager to hear about these experiences, seeking deeper meaning in their own lives. But not everything was easy. I faced skepticism and even ridicule from some former colleagues and friends. Some accused me of having hallucinated due to the illness and medication. Others suggested I was just seeking attention or trying to capitalize on a traumatic experience. These criticisms hurt, but the understanding I had gained allowed me to view them with compassion. I understood that fear and uncertainty were often at the root of these negative reactions. One of the most surprising discoveries was my new interest in numerology and paranormal phenomena. The mathematical codes I had seen during my experience led me to study the hidden meanings of numbers. I began offering numerology readings, helping people find meaning and direction in their lives through these number patterns. I have also dabbled in paranormal investigations, using my personal experience as a lens to explore other unexplained phenomena. It wasn't about proving or disproving anything, but about keeping an open mind to possibilities beyond our everyday understanding. Throughout this process, my health continued to be a challenge. AIDS was still present in my body, but I found that my new perspective on life gave me an inner strength that helped me deal with the physical symptoms. Each day was an opportunity to live fully, to share love and compassion, regardless of external circumstances. Gradually, I began to see my illness not as a curse, but as an integral part of my journey. She had taken me through the near-death experience that transformed my life, and continued to teach me valuable lessons about vulnerability, acceptance, and the preciousness of every moment. As I embraced this new purpose, I felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that I had never experienced before. I knew there was still so much to learn and share, and I was excited to see where this new journey would take me. As I moved into this new phase of my life, I rediscovered the value of human connections in a deep and meaningful way. One of the first people I reached out to after my recovery was David Carter, the friend and fellow journalist who had insisted that I receive treatment that fateful night. Our reunion was exciting and transformative. David listened intently as I shared my experience, his eyes widening with amazement and, at times, filling with tears. He confessed that during the weeks I was in a coma, he visited the hospital every day, talking to me and holding my hand, even when the doctors said it was unlikely I would be able to hear him. The friendship between us, which was already strong, deepened even further. David became not just a friend, but a partner in my new mission. He used his journalistic skills to help me articulate my experience in a way that could reach a wider audience. Together, we began working on a series of articles and even a documentary about near-death experiences and their transformative impacts. Another meaningful reunion was with Evelyn, the nurse who took care of me during my stay in the hospital. When I met her again, I was surprised to discover that she had been deeply affected by my experience. She told me that during the most critical moments of my illness, she felt a comforting presence in the hospital room, something she couldn't explain but that filled her with hope. Evelyn shared that my journey inspired her to continue her work as a nurse with a new sense of purpose. She became interested in palliative care, helping terminally ill patients and their families find peace and acceptance in the face of death. Our conversations about the nature of life and death became a source of mutual comfort and inspiration. As my story spread, I began to receive messages from people all over the world who had gone through similar experiences. Each story was unique, but there were common themes that echoed my own journey: feelings of peace and unconditional love, encounters with deceased loved ones, a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. These connections led me to organize support groups for people who had had near-death experiences. At these meetings, we created a safe space where people could share their stories without fear of judgment or ridicule. Seeing the relief and joy on people's faces when they finally found others who understood their experiences was incredibly rewarding. My work with numerology has also brought me new and interesting connections. People came to me not just for readings, but to discuss the deeper meaning of the patterns in their lives. These conversations often turned into in-depth discussions about life purpose, personal growth, and spirituality. One of the most unexpected and meaningful connections I made was with a quantum physicist who was interested in my experience with mathematical codes during my NDE. Our discussions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the intersection of science and spirituality opened new perspectives for both. Each new encounter, each new connection, seemed to confirm the central message of my experience, that we are all deeply interconnected, that each life touches countless others in ways we cannot always see or understand. As these connections multiplied and deepened, I felt like I was fulfilling the purpose for which I had returned. I was not only sharing my own story, but helping others find meaning and hope in their own journeys. As the years have passed since my near-death experience, I have found myself often reflecting on the journey that brought me here. Each day felt like an opportunity to apply the lessons I learned during that extraordinary experience. One of the deepest reflections I continue to have is about the nature of time. I vividly remember the visions of the future I saw during my experience, visions that, as time passes, I see manifesting in ways both expected and surprising. Visions of 2024 in particular continue to intrigue me. I saw conflict and destruction, yes, but I also saw possibilities for healing and transformation. As we approach this year, I see signs of both paths unfolding. Wars continue to ravage parts of the world. Corporate greed still causes significant damage to our planet. But at the same time, I see a growing awakening, an emerging collective consciousness that recognizes our fundamental interconnectedness and the urgent need for change. I use these visions not as fixed predictions, but as a reminder of the responsibility we all share in shaping our collective future. Every choice we make, every act of kindness or selfishness, contributes to the world we are creating. My own health remains a constant challenge. Sharing my story and the lessons I learned, the talks I give, the books I write, the numerology sessions I lead. All of this has become a way to spread the message of love, compassion, and interconnection that is at the heart of my experience. David and I continue our partnership, investigating paranormal phenomena and sharing stories of personal transformation. Our work has taken us to places I never imagined we would visit, brought us into contact with people from all walks of life. Each new experience seems to confirm the fundamental truth I've learned, that we are all connected in deep and mysterious ways. Looking to the future, I feel a mixture of hope and apprehension. The visions I saw show a difficult road ahead for humanity, but they also show our incredible potential for healing and transformation. I firmly believe that we have the power to choose our path, to create a future based on love and mutual understanding. My near-death experience taught me that death is not the end, but a transition. This knowledge gives me peace in the face of the uncertainty of the future. I know that whatever path life takes, I am part of something much larger, eternally connected to the infinite flow of existence. As I continue my journey, I remain open to the lessons each day brings. I continue to observe the number patterns I see in the world around me, always searching for the deeper meaning behind surface appearances. My message to everyone I encounter remains constant. Live with love, act with compassion, recognize your connection to all beings. Because in the end, that's what really matters. This is what remains when everything else fades away. And so I continue my journey, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every opportunity to grow and share. The future may be uncertain, but I am at peace, knowing that I am part of a vast, loving universe, eternally connected to all that is.